guest speakers who've been talking about veterans, and we've been talking about mental health, we've been talking about motivation and various other topics along the way. Well, tonight we have a very special guest speaker, Sue Altass, who is going to tell us a bit more about coping mechanisms and how we can actually, for the families of the veterans, it's something we kind of overlook, and it's not something that we kind of think of ordinarily. So I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to Sue, who will tell us all about coping mechanisms and what to expect. And then if there's any questions at the end, feel free to ask. Over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks for the Green TV PATT Foundation for having us. My background within this, I'll tell you a little bit about me, if that's all right first, is that I've been a mental health nurse for a number of years. We won't go into that because it's far too long. And I've really gone through lots of different areas of working, right through the NHS, the prisons, and working with lots and lots of different people, which led us to set up our own business called Inspire Ignite. And that was around, so that was all around trying to get people to see that emotional intelligence was the same, or on the same level and a understanding as academic intelligence, really, or IQ as people call it now. And that led us to doing some training and looking at how people react to each other when change is needed. And I've got some slides in a little while to talk about transition and transition in life, because we work with all kinds of different people, but I had a particular interest in veterans in that I was in the TAs for a long, long time. And when I was up at Catterick working with the psychiatric unit, there was very little offered to veterans that were transitioning back into civilian life, or even, and there was very little offered to the families that were expecting those, their veterans, their partners, back into home life. And that created, or could create sometimes, such a discord. I mean, as we know, there is probably the highest divorce rate in the forces. And a lot of that is because, you know, we don't actually give people the skills or the understanding of how to change back into a completely different life. So when we set up the business, we started to work with York and Ripon St John University, and we actually created a course, it's just a one-day learning teaching course for families and veterans to understand the transition back into civilian life. I've got a few slides which I'm quite happy to go through, and then we can have a chat at the end. And if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them if I can, if that's okay.
Perfect.
All right, so AD, can we have the slides then, please? As we know, this is live, so...
The technical bit. Oh, perfect.
So transition in life, and I prefer to call it transition in life, because it's not just about your transition from any force back into civilian, and it's not just about the veteran coming back into civilian life. It's about the families and their transition that they're going to have to make to accept a family member that has not been there or have been transient for a good many years, really, which is massive. And this comes through a lot of people, not just through the forces, but today we're going to focus on that. And what we hear from veterans and their families is that they have almost an alter ego. The bits that are welcome whilst on duty, you know, the drive, the competitiveness, the camaraderie, the aggression persona works really well whilst they're away and doing the job that they've been training and trained to do for years and years. However, on their return home, or their transition out of the forces to civilian life, they feel completely stripped of an identity that was comfortable, and that gave them a role. And so that person has to renegotiate and re-identify who on earth they are.
Yeah.
Because the last so many years they have built on a persona that isn't actually real, it isn't them.
No. I suppose as well, they're told what to say and think and how to, then all of a sudden they've got no sergeant, telling them what to do on a daily basis. They've got to do it for themselves.
Well, they are. I mean, they are part of this mega team that is so supportive that each person looks after each person. And when you transition back, that stripped is gone. And you would expect, you'd want the family that you're transitioning into, you want them to take on that role sometimes, or you want to take on the role of protection of that family. And yet that family have had to deal with protecting themselves while this person's been away. So it's a real complex myriad of emotions that not just the veteran has to comprehend and go through, but also the family. And then when there are children involved, and at different ages and different stages, they all have to go through those emotional roller coasters. So you've got lots of individuals trying to live in one house, trying to find out who they all are, and yet society says, well, we got married, we had children, we should all be able to do this. But we don't give anybody the tools to do it.
No.
So for families, they've sort of fallen in love with the partners and the spouses, with someone who actually doesn't really exist. Because this person's been going away for so many months and coming back, which is great because it's a lovely time when they come back and they do lots together, but then they go away again. So the person that comes into that doesn't need a role, a male role or female role. They don't need that role because they're not there long enough to create a role. And when they leave again, the person that's left at home, the families, go back to their roles that they've created and dealing with on their own. And it's almost like who is a mirror of what is expected of them because of their professional work persona. And it doesn't always fit. It's not always a good fit for each other. And so it's almost like starting to live again. And that's the struggle. Because everybody's vying for position. Everybody's vying for a role. So at Inspire Ignite, we started to look at what makes change hard. So if we move on to the next slide. AD, thanks. So what makes change hard? Well, there's two main things that we look at. And the first is ambivalence. So as the top picture shows, who knows which side to be on? At one minute, the veteran and the person who's been in the forces has been in this huge team effort role where they've had a very, very specific role to play. And then all of a sudden, they're in a completely different arena with a completely different role to play. So if you're not ready to make that change, which is really hard, then why not walk down the middle? You don't know. So being ambivalent, wanting and not wanting the change, do I stay? Do I go? And then you start to get the roller coaster of emotions that we've talked about. I'm not wanted here. I have no role here. And the families are like, well, yes, we want you, but we don't want you to do that because we've already decided that's what we do. We have a routine. So, and you can't just come in and change that routine. So that person then feels unwanted. And when you feel unwanted, our brain, if you like, starts to say, well, I'll go. I'm not wanted. Nobody needs me. Nobody loves me. And that's what our main target is for, is to be needed and to be loved and to be looked after. So ambivalence plays a massive part in families and veterans coming back together. And the second one is anxiety. You know, will I fit in? Will they be changed? Will they have any problems to come back with? So the families are trying to deal with letting this person back in, but also the anxiety of the what ifs. And the same for the person coming back. So procrastination and making no decision and letting someone else, because it might be wrong, who knows, let them make decisions. No, let them make the decisions. Well, you're the man of the house, or you've been doing this role for X number of years, so you carry on doing it. No, we want you to do it. And that's how the rumbling of a volcano starts, if you like, that's in the household. And then you've also got, if you've got children in the household, how do those children react? They're there to protect the person that's been living with them for a long time. And yet there's this person that's come back into the family, and not all veterans families are like this. What we're talking about here is the families and that struggle with that. And so they're saying, well, you know, we want you back in, but you can only do this. Well, no, I don't want to do that. That's not my role. So what makes change really hard are the ambivalence and the anxiety of putting two completely different lifestyles together again. So how can we help to start and understand the change? And it's about first and foremost listening to what the family wants and listening to what the person, the veteran coming back into the family, wants. And sometimes they're just at different levels, and it's about discussing that and supporting and having a supported discussion to do it. If we move on to the next slide, this of course is always driven by the hidden force that drives human potential, and it's the why behind actions, and sometimes called the unconscious motivators. You know, we can see the motivators, we can see why we do what we do, and we know that because we can see those. But the unconscious motivators, they're not talents, they're not skills. So all these skills, this person that's been away for a long time has built up and has been really useful and needed, all of a sudden may not be needed in the environment they're moving into. And the families that they've come back to are looking for the skills and the motivations of what they think that person should be bringing to the household. If all of this, I'm hoping this makes sense, Gail. Am I talking all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Got it, yes. I haven't got any questions in the chat at this point.
That's all right.
And it's all very clear, thanks, Sue.
Thank you. So the unconscious motivators are not talents. They're like dislikes, abilities, preference styles or types. Instead, they actually represent deep motivations that are working on an unconscious level. So we don't always know that that's what's pushing our buttons. But what we call them at Inspire Ignite is the triggers. And then it's a bit like, you know, we've all seen the iceberg picture where success is at the top and the drive, and we survive and we thrive. But what we don't see is all the stuff that's under the sea. You know, the failures that we've done, the perseverance, the things that we've had to give up to actually make sure that we fit into that environment. So it's almost like recreating a new success story and to come back into it. So when and a lot of families will encounter resistance, and that's not conscious resistance, that's unconscious resistance. So that it's like the behavior then fits. So it's like, well, I don't want to do it that way. I don't feel I belong here. And that, instead of rolling with the resistance and saying, let's have a look at how we can change things in the family, we don't. We tend to then fight against it. So we have to look at, and what we do with families and with veterans, we look at the whys. So if we move on to the next slide, and all of these boxes will fill up. Now, often what happens is we look at, and people work, and a lot of CBT and things like that, they work on the behaviour and the outcome. You know, somebody's behaviour, you've come back in and your behaviour isn't right in our family because the outcome is we're arguing all the time. And so what we tend to look at, and you go for counselling, what have you, behaviour counselling works on the behaviour. We need to change the behaviour. But you can't change the behaviour, we believe, unless you understand the triggers. And those triggers may have been brought up, whether they've been away or whether the family have created a way to survive, a way to persist. So the triggers always come at the thought. You know, unless the feelings will feed a behaviour. So if we're anxious, or if we're really don't know what's happening, our behaviour is anxiety. And then our outcome is the fight or flight. But if we don't look at the thoughts and try to understand the triggers that sets thought off, so if we're really going into the brain, the neocortex bit, because it completely stops all the other thinking. So if we aren't aware of those triggers, then we can't change them. So we work with the families on the triggers that's not working with the person coming back into the nucleus of the family. And that's where the choice comes in. So we're helping the families understand that this person is returning back into the family. And the choice they need to make, the choice that they need to make so that they can change the feeling, that then changes a behaviour, that then gives a different outcome. So that's what we work with a lot of people, is a lot of deeper understanding the unconscious motivators around the thoughts and the feelings. Okay, so I'm hoping that that's clear for people. And if we move on to, and I think that's it for my slides really, because I wanted to just give you a flavour of the sort of things we do with families and their veterans, because the transition back into civilian life is much more complex and difficult than we're actually led to believe. And that's one of the reasons why psychiatric units and mental health units were set up eventually. Certainly when I was in the TAs, I was on part of the ambulance train and was away in Germany a lot. And we were asked to actually, one of the first to set up a mental health unit or psychiatric unit, which sounds very dramatic, but it was a mental health unit for people and veterans coming back or transitioning out of the forces. And that's not that very long ago, really.
No. So I've got a question. We haven't actually, I've just had a look, we haven't actually got any in the chat. I think everybody's just digesting what you're saying, and a brilliant presentation, kind of separated it down into obviously is something, it's not something we can just understand in a quick chat. You know, you've done this for years, and the complexity of things, you know, is not something we can just pick at in a 20-minute, half an hour chat. But my question would be, so families, soldiers, veterans, you know, whatever servicemen have come home and they are struggling with families, or maybe they've settled in quite well, but the families are struggling to adapt. What would be a first port of call for them to reach out? If I was in that position, you know, I would think, well, who do I talk to? You know, I don't want a psychologist, or I don't want to have therapy. You know, some people, that's not their first. What would be a good channel for somebody to, you know, ask for help for?
Well, as far as I'm aware, the forces, when somebody's transitioning from the forces back into civilian life, there is 2 years of support, and that's not just funding. That's lots of things to support, and it may be that it is a mental health practitioner. And thanks almost to COVID, it's been really useful, because mental health isn't such a stereotypical, dreaded word anymore, which it can only be a good thing, really. So they should access that support and ask for what they need. And if it's, and the families are the same, they have access to that pot, if you like. And there are a lot more trained people who work within the forces with the transition.
Right,
if there isn't, you know, they can go to the GPs.
Right.
Mental health services are stretched everywhere and will be. Please get in touch with us.
Yeah.
We would, you know, if anybody is really struggling, then we can try and unpick and help them to either to support them, or we can also work with them. I mean, York and Ripon St John do a course, a one-day course, and it's for all practitioners. They do the one we have provided that are for families, and it's for practitioners to help with families, but they also do a one-day course. Nick Wood at York and Ripon St John, who is a patron of all of that, he provides a one-day on I can't remember what it's called now. I think it's the Military Man or something like that. But it's really good, and it does help practitioners to learn that it's not just about PTSD or anger management, or for the families, it's the same.
Everyday life, isn't it?
It is everyday life transition, which is why we say it's transition for life. It's not, it isn't about, you know, being in the army or forces, sorry, and then back into the family. It's the same for the families. They've had to create a false environment for them to survive.
Absolutely. There's one of our viewers has put in the chat, obviously following on from your presentation, that it's a loss of purpose and an identity thing. I mean, does that relate to a lot of the people that you've worked with, for example? Is that a common, you know, denominator?
Yeah, as Andy's just put, the military human, which is great. Loss of identity it's a role, you know, Gail. If we look at the roles people have, and it really doesn't matter whether you're an infantry person or a chef or whatever you do in those forces, because it is a completely different environment. In saying that, the family is experiencing exactly the same. They're experiencing a completely unreal environment.
Yes.
Because, you know, if it's the mother, even if it's the father, they become the provider. So to survive, and to thrive, we have to adapt to change. But they've created that environment. You know, for the simplest things like taking the kids to school, it becomes a military exercise at home. And then somebody else comes in and says, oh, no, let them have some sweets before night time. Oh, really? And then you try to get the kids up in the morning and they're bouncing off the walls. And that soon grates on people that are trying to create that role. Now, everybody knows this that's listening that I'm talking about, but it's like, who do you talk to? who's going to understand what you're trying to say? And if you want to talk about it, and great if we could have family therapy, there's a list as long as your arm. And I used to work in the family therapy, and it'd be great because I think for me, every family, every veteran that is transitioning should be offered. And it's not about psychotherapy, and that's the big issue, I think, is this bit, I'm not crazy, I'm not this, I'm not that. But family therapy is all about finding out who you are, where you fit in, and how we're going to make a new jigsaw, if you like, because that's what it's about. It's about the pieces coming together, but it may be in a very different way. You know, the family might have had 1 or 2 children as the person's left, and now they're coming back. It's like, oh, there's 3 in this family, not 1. And you have to learn to deal with that. And we don't give the tools. Whereas, so what we decided at Inspire Ignite, and it's great to be working with yourselves, is to pick veterans that want support or are struggling. We want them to come forward. You know, you don't have to go into the mental health system if you don't want. There are lots of ways to get help now, and that there are lots of charities and support, and it's not about handouts, it's about getting back into a role of life, and finding out what you're good at, because those skills that they have are transitional. And the same with the family members, their skills that they have can open up into different things. But sometimes it's a bit like, you know, in a divorce, you have a negotiator sometimes, or whatever they call them. It's exactly the same. Negotiators aren't always there to take people apart. They're actually there to keep people together and families together. And that third person that has absolutely no identity with either one is a great person to use. So I think that's one of the key.
Right. It's about reaching out and doing that first port of call, isn't it?
It is. It is. And sometimes, sorry, Gail, sorry to interrupt. Sometimes it's about, you don't have to talk about the thing that's on your mind. Sometimes, shall we have a cup of tea and chat about, which is why I think the PATT Foundation and the tree planting is fantastic, to get people out and just talk about whatever they want to do. They might be talking about the weather, that's great. But when somebody has a connection and feels secure, there might be all sorts of things come out.
Yes.
And when that comes out, you can deal with it.
It is. And I've noticed that getting in groups of veterans together, they feel safe. They feel, you know, whether in whatever environment, it's like the back on crew type of thing. So it is. That's a very, so I would encourage them to speak, you know, to the professionals as well as each other. And the PATT Foundation, the work they're doing is, and obviously with the tree planting with the Green Task Force, is proving very, very successful, very worthwhile, and it very rewarding, as you know, because you was out tree planting with us not so long ago. So out in the elements, and you planted your first tree as well. So that was that in itself. It is, you know, they're doing. I think you know, I'm no psychologist, but it's the act of doing something, feeling worthwhile, having a purpose, which anybody in life needs to, but I think more so the veterans, because they're used to that type of environment.
And the same for the families as well, really. You know, we have to encourage the families that it's okay not to be okay when their spouse or partner comes back into the family, because you know, they don't understand how to deal with it, and that's okay. So ask for help.
Exactly.
You don't have to accept what comes through the door. It's about talking about it, and that's really important.
Well, thank you very much, Sue. Brilliant presentation, and I hope the veterans that are watching this, or if you know, and families, because this will be recorded and go out onto the YouTube channels and the various public Facebook, Twitter, and all social media. We've got to use this modern day thing, haven't we? This social media malarkey.
Yeah.
But yes, it will get out there, and hopefully, you know, even if we help just one person, it will be worthwhile. So thanks ever so much, Sue.
Can I just ask, Gail, have we got a minute? Paul has put in emotional intelligence is like a dirty word in the military, which is really interesting, because I thought emotional intelligence rather than mental health would be a better wording. Well, not me, but that's what the persona of people think. So, Paul, I would ask, if you want to get in touch and help us understand perhaps then what a better way of promoting the EQ and IQ, because that's what it is. It's the EQ and IQ, and everybody's okay with IQ because it's intelligence.
Yeah.
But emotional intelligence is just the same. So I'd be really interested to understand what would be a better way to address the inner workings of somebody's mind, because that's what it is. It's the inner workings of your mind. So thanks for that, Paul.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. If you want to get in touch with us, either through PATT Foundation or Sue at Inspire Ignite, that would be great, because it, like I say, it might help somebody else out there. So, yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed this evening. Had a great time, and look for the show being posted out. Thanks ever so much again to Sue, and yes, we shall look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.